In this week's international focus, we turn to neighbouring Japan, where the pandemic situation appears to be abating as authorities there seek to better respond to international matters, including the bloodshed over in Ukraine. I have Walter Sim live on the line. Walter, it's good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Walter, let's begin with a few words on the Japanese media coverage of Korea's presidential election.
Sure. Well, all in all, the mood has been very positive, and I think Japanese media as well as the government sees this presidential election as a chance to hit the reset button after, ties between Japan and South Korea basically chilled under outgoing President Moon Jae-in. I do think that, the clear preference amongst Tokyo bureaucrats was for a more predictable conservative government, and it was also under the last conservative government that the comfort woman deal was struck in 2015, and so I think this has contributed to an overall positive atmosphere over the outcome of the election.
Right. And Walter, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has congratulated President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol on his victory and has added hopes for better bilateral ties. What do pundits there in Japan believe is necessary, perhaps, to set up a constructive relationship?
Well, that's a very difficult question because, pundits here in Japan, as well as government diplomats, really believe that the ball is in South Korea's court to offer solutions to issues that have cropped up over the last 5 years, such as South Korean court rulings to seize assets of Japanese companies over their role in wartime labor 70 years ago. And so it really remains to be seen how Mr. Yoon will approach this, given that, he is a political and diplomatic novice. So Japan, in a way, well, there's no better way to put this, but I think a lot of Japanese politicians think that South Korean politicians have sought to tap all these historical grievances to, score political brownie points when their approval ratings fall. And so there are concerns here in Japan that, Mr. Yoon's agenda might well be hamstrung by political infighting, given how divisive the election was. But nonetheless, there are still some bright sparks, and there are hopes that ROK will work more closely with Japan as well as the United States on such issues as North Korea, as well as to promote regional stability. Some Japanese experts are also wondering if South Korea might prove to be a valuable partner for Quad, as well as the free and open Indo-Pacific framework that Japan has been spearheading all these years.
Right. Walter, moving on to the pandemic front, I hear, like I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 situation in Japan appears to be improving. Am I right?
Yes, it has been stabilizing, and some experts here in Japan say that, Japan has been past the Omicron peak, even though one area of concern is that the number of serious cases as well as the daily death toll remains quite high. Yesterday, there were about 60,000 cases nationwide, whilst the quasi-emergency remains in place in 18 prefectures, including Tokyo and Osaka, until March 21st. But that said, I think the government is coming to a realization that it is untenable to keep, these curbs going indefinitely. And some reports are now stating that Prime Minister Kishida's government is thinking of lifting restrictions, even if the caseload remains high, as it starts to treat COVID-19 as an endemic disease. We also see some signs of this in how Prime Minister Kishida has moved to reopen borders quite rapidly after Japan came under serious criticism worldwide over its isolationist policy. So Japan will now allow in as many as 100,000 foreign students by May, and this pace, I think, is really unthinkable just weeks ago.
Right, that would be 100,000 foreign students from about 7,000, is it, this week then?
Well, the quota for foreign students is separate from the daily quota of 7,000 arrivals a day. So I think, Prime Minister Kishida is really going to accelerate, allowing foreigners to enter going forward.
I see. Walter, meanwhile, on the international front, I believe Japan has been quick to respond to Russia's violent campaign over in Ukraine with punitive measures. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, indeed. And Japan has done a lot of things by working pretty much in lockstep with its partners in the G7. So it has imposed sanctions on Russia and Belarus. And has also offered to take in Ukrainian refugees. And I think in a very notable and very rare move this week, it sent a plane load of non-lethal military equipment such as bulletproof vests and helmets to frontline fighters in Ukraine. Now, this is significant because of Japan's pacifist stance since World War II. And so I think this opens the door for Japan to, play a more proactive role in supporting friendly forces in other conflicts going forward in future. Now, Japan's corporate sector has also taken part in a widening global boycott. So we see companies like Uniqlo, like Nintendo, Sony, and Hitachi saying that they would suspend operations or sales in Russia. But that said, it might also be worth looking at what Japan has not done to see the delicate balancing act that Japan is facing. Firstly, it has not stopped imports of Russian oil and LNG because this is going to hurt its own energy security as a resource-poor country. It's worth noting that the United States as well as other G7 countries have said that they would stop imports of Russian energy supplies, and so Japan's move, I think, stands out on this front. Companies like Mitsui and Mitsubishi have not joined its other counterparts like BP and Shell in pulling out of Russian energy projects as well.
Right. And Walter, finally, today, that is March 11th, marks the 11th anniversary of the nuclear nightmare in Japan's Fukushima region. Now, since then, regional authorities in that region have pledged to forge a renewable future with all energy needs to be met by clean power by the year 2040, I believe. How far have they come?
Well, they have moved forward on this very quickly, and Fukushima really is rebranding itself as a renewable energy as well as a robotics hub under the so-called Fukushima Innovation Coast framework. There's a Fukushima hydrogen research field in the region, which basically provided hydrogen power that fueled the Olympic Village in the Tokyo Olympics last year. So as well as the fact that solar panels and wind power plants really dot the Fukushima coastline these days. So I think there is political will in Fukushima to put the actions where the words are. And infrastructure development as well is nearly complete in the region. We see new roads, new railways, new expressways, for instance. But that said, however, I do think that the reconstruction efforts have been quite complicated in other aspects. So just to spotlight a couple of issues in the interest of time. So first, there are efforts to overcome so-called harmful rumors that Fukushima brands as the fourth disaster after the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster. And Fukushima produced exports are actually now at pre-disaster levels in data that Fukushima provided. But yet a plan that the IAEA has endorsed to release water from the crippled Fukushima Daiichi plant is causing a lot of unease amongst the locals, despite the IAEA stressing that the water will be treated to remove all radioactive substances except the harmless tritium, which itself is a routine byproduct of nuclear plants worldwide. The IAEA also says that the water will be diluted to 1/40th of the allowed tritium limit before discharge. But locals fear that all these hard data means nothing if the authorities fail to convey this sense of trust and safety, given how subjective and primal emotions are. There's also in a sense, a spat by Prime Minister Kishida against former Prime Ministers Junichiro Koizumi and Naoto Kan, who are now prominent anti-nuclear lobbyists, after the two ex-premiers said that many children are suffering from thyroid cancer due to the nuclear disaster. Prime Minister Kishida said that this is fake news, this is false information. But I think this also goes to show how primal emotions remain 11 years after the tragedy. And there's a new lawsuit filed by 6 people who were minors when the nuclear accident happened. They now suffer from thyroid cancer, though they do not have a family history of the disease. Japan insists that the accident has not caused any health-related problems. But I think whichever way the lawsuit is ruled, I think the verdict will send reverberations throughout Japanese society.
Right, it certainly seems that way, Walter. All right, then as always, Walter, thank you very much for the latest from neighbouring Japan.
Thank you very much.